So welcome again, welcome back. Sorry to take some of your break. In this presentation I will also have the challenge of trying to finish a lot of pages within a limited time, but we'll see. I hope I get out alive at the end of this presentation. I'm going to be saying things you may not like. This is a warning, you can still leave, I don't mind. So if you don't like what you hear, okay. You can criticize me afterwards, I don't mind, but usually you shouldn't kill the messenger, right? So let's see. Maybe you have something to do penance afterwards. If not for ourselves, then maybe for this world for sure. In this presentation I would like to reflect with you on the message that is perhaps more urgent today than ever, the moral warning of Fatima. Look around you at society, culture, the media, young people. You cannot fail to notice that something fundamentally is shifting. What the Blessed Mother announced 100 years ago is now becoming a reality around us in its full extent. And to understand this better, I would like to return not only to Fatima, but draw to the insights of one of the sharpest Catholic thinkers of the 20th century, Professor Plinio Correa de Oliveira. His analysis of the moral crisis and the revolution in the human soul and the struggle between purity and the disruption helps us name what we often feel, but is sometimes difficult to put into words. After this presentation, you will not only understand more about what is really going on in our culture, things we may have been unconsciously noticing for a time, but you will also look differently at your own choices, your lifestyle, and the world around you. We will discover how moral self-control and inner purity are not only personal virtues, but the foundation of civilization, freedom, and spiritual strength, and why it is necessary that we recognize this struggle and respond to it consciously. And as Our Lady of Fatima has said, the fashions will arise which will greatly offend Our Lady. Those who serve God should not follow the fashions. The Church has no fashions. Our Lord is always the same. When I'm not mistaken, it was said by Jacinta. I think when she was in hospital, she had several apparitions and said many things also. And this is one of them. It was in the book of Saint Lucia. In the 20th century, you would still see modest dresses for women. Long, feminine, elegant, the upper arms covered and the cleavage covered. In the 30s and 40s, the change is already visible. The shorter skirts and the arms partly uncovered, but compared to today, many would consider them very modest, right? If you would see this on the street, you would think, wow, that's a very modest woman. According to the time, they didn't feel like that. It was a revolutionary act to say, okay, the skirt will be shorter, and I have photos of the after the war of women, but they were so immodest I could not show you. From the 60s onward, this development began to gather momentum. The sexual revolution, combined with mass media, film and pop culture, broke with the century-old notion that clothing should be not only aesthetically, but also linked to dignity, virtue, and social responsibility. Clothing became a means of expression, detached from tradition and from the idea that the body is something to be treated with respect. The fashion industry discovered that liberation sold very well. The less fabric, the greater the commercial appeal. The ideal of sobriety gave way to the emphasis on stimulation, attention, and sensuality. And especially in the summer, you see it all around you, right? But I will not leave you men out. When we extend this line to the men's fashion, we see the same shift. Men's clothing also became looser, more informal, more focused on comfort than on dignity. The smart suit, once the symbol of masculinity, responsibility and maturity, was increasingly replaced with jeans, t-shirts, sportswear, and in recent decades even clothing that barely distinguishes between private sports and workswear. And I've even seen a trend of going on the street in pajama. I mean, this is not a joke. This is a reality. And sometimes you don't see the difference between the pajama and the clothing anyway. In the summer, I regularly encountered men cycling or jogging with their upper bodies completely uncovered. Shame or pudor, in the traditional sense of the word, the feeling that the body is something that must be treated with respect, seems to have completely disappeared. The change in clothing behaviors are therefore not superficial evolution in fashion, but reflect a deeper cultural shift, a weakening of the awareness that clothing also has a moral, social, and a spiritual dimension. What began as a seemingly innocent shortening of the skirt has grown into a culture in which the line between dignity and exhibitionism is becoming increasingly blurred. Men and women are swept into this movement. If we understand this history, we see that clothing is not just a fashion phenomenon, but a mirror of the civilization. And the mirror now held up to us is that a society has lost its sight of dignity. Our Lady conveyed through Sister Lucia one of the most sobering and forceful warnings given at Fatima. Quote, "More souls go to hell because of the sins of the flesh than for any other reason." End of quote. This statement touches on the core of the moral crisis of our time and should not be treated lightly. What exactly does it mean, sins of the flesh? This is not just about individual transgression, but about an entire culture that undermines the dignity of the human body, ridicules chastity, and glorifies impurity. These are sins that arise from a disordered desires, the abuse of sexuality outside the order established by God, and the normalization of behavior that distracts the soul from the direction towards goodness. It is in this context that Our Lady's words sound even more urgent. The crisis is not limited to one place or one people. It extends across the entire world. And therefore we must clearly examine where these sins manifest themselves and how they influence our society, and how we as Catholics are called to counter them with the virtue of purity and self-control. It started all in the previous century with contraception. Before the Great War in the form of condoms, and after that started in the 60s with the pill and hormonal contraception. Today, about 2/3 of the women are on contraceptives. Contraceptives separate the conjugal act of procreation, and the effect is described by Paul VI in his encyclical Humanae Vitae. Quote, "Another effect that gives cause for alarm is that a man who grows accustomed to the use of contraceptive methods may forget the reference due to a woman, and disregard her physical and emotional equilibrium, reducing her to being a mere instrument for satisfaction of his own desires, and no longer considering her as his partner with whom he should surround care and affection. Surround with care and affection." So basically, contraception, which is preached as the liberation of women, is actually the opposite. It's going to oppress women, and women are being more and more treated just as a body for their sexual pleasure of men because of contraceptives. Another consequence of this approach of the conjugal act is abortion, as almost all the abortions arise from unwanted pregnancy, where the conjugal act was intended to give life. Today, about 75,000 lives of unborn children in Australia are brutally murdered by abortion. Not considering marriage as a sacred sacrament has had profound consequences for society. When the union between husband and wife is no longer seen as something instituted by God and sustained by grace, it becomes vulnerable, and the pressure of individualism, fleeting emotion, and self-interest. In this weakened understanding of marriage, adultery and growing culture of egoism have inevitably led to an ever-increasing number of divorces. And it's true that in some places the official divorce rate has shown a slight decline in recent years. But this superficial improvement hides the deeper problem. Many couples no longer even consider to enter into marriage. Instead, they choose to cohabit, often with the unspoken assumption that the commitment should remain conditional and temporarily. This shift does not reflect a renewed respect for the permanence of marriage, but rather an erosion of the very idea of a lifelong fidelity. And speaking of the sins of the flesh, I hardly need to persuade any of you the shocking and ever-growing number of men, and increasingly also women, who consume pornography on a regular basis. It has become one of the most widespread moral plagues of our time, and embedded in daily life through technology, anonymity, and instant accessibility. The devastating effects of this addiction on individuals, relationships, and society as a whole cannot be overstated. Pornography distorts the understanding of human sexuality, destroys the authentic intimacy, fuels loneliness, and reduces the human body to a person and to consumption. It corrodes marriages, contributes to infidelity, and forms young people in a deeply disordered view of love and the human body long before they have the maturity to understand real relationships. It is therefore no surprise that more and more people worldwide, including unfortunately also Australians, are increasingly supportive of the newest moral revolution, the LGBT movement and the ideology of transgenderism. These trends did not emerge in isolation. They are predictable fruits of a culture that has long detached sexuality from its God-given purpose, eroded the sense of modesty, and allowed disordered passions to shape personal identity. When the foundations of Christian morality are weakened, society becomes vulnerable to ever more radical interpretation of the human nature itself. But this raises an essential question. Where do these passions come from? What is it within the human heart that makes us susceptible to these temptations against purity? How can we acquire the virtue of chastity? And what concrete steps can we take to avoid falling into the very sin that we have just described? About this, the rest of this presentation will be. Before we can address the practical means of cultivating chastity and resisting the moral decline around us, it is essential to understand how the human soul actually functions, how our passions, our will, and our reason relate to one another. Many Catholics instinctively know that they must control their desires, but a few understand the inner order that the Church and the great Catholic thinkers teach us. A profound explanation of this inner structure is given by Professor Plinio Correa de Oliveira in his work Revolution and Counter-Revolution, where he writes, and I quote, "Passions as such, here referred to in the technical sense, are morally indifferent. It is their disorderliness that makes them bad. However, while regulated, they are good and obey the will and reason faithfully. It is in the vigor of soul that comes to a man because God governs his reason governs his will, and his will dominates his sensibility, that we must look for a serene, noble, and highly effective driving force for the counter-revolution." Is it clear? So, intellect, will, and the passions. The passions are not bad, and the passions and the desire or the inclination itself is not sin, as the Protestants are saying. It can be even virtuous. When the inclination to sin is immediately denied and immediately rejected right away, without giving in to it at all, it can be even virtuous. And many saints were tempted in horrendous ways even, but never gave in. And that's what made them so heroic examples to us. This passage is rich and deserves a careful meditation. Professor Plinio describes the fundamental hierarchy that should exist within every person. And as Catholic teaching teaches us as well, our sensibility must be governed by our will must be governed by our reason, which must be subjected to God. It should count on the power of the divine grace, without which every spiritual battle has no meaning. When this order is intact, the soul becomes strong, serene, balanced, and capable of resisting even powerful temptations. So, sensibility. We have to speak about our senses. I'm sure that you know what are our senses. Seeing, hearing, smelling, tasting, and touching. These 5 senses form the gateway through which we first come to know the world. From early childhood on, they shape our understanding of reality. Like the burning heat of a stove teaches us caution long before reason does. And the warm smell of a freshly baked cake teaches us comfort, home, and affection in a way that the world could never do. Yet these senses are also means through which we perceive heavenly realities. We hear the preaching of the gospel, the words that transmit the divine truth. We see the most holy Eucharist exposed on the altar, and our eyes recognize, even if under the veil of bread, the real presence of our Lord. Sacred art, sacred music, incense, the touch of holy water, all these sensory signs elevate the soul and points towards the supernatural. So the next question arises. What is the hierarchy of the senses, and why does it matter for virtue? St. Thomas Aquinas addressed this question explicitly in his Summa Theologica, and again in De Veritate. In these works he explains that the senses are not equal in dignity and perfection. Each sense has a different role in the life of the soul, and the nobility depends on how closely they assist the intellect, which is the highest faculty of man. According to St. Thomas, the more a sense contributes to knowledge that is universal, stable, and ordered, the more noble it is. Sight and hearing, therefore, hold the highest places among the senses. Sight allows us to perceive form, proportion, harmony, and order. Hearing allows us to receive spoken language, instruction, and sacred doctrine. Both senses are tied to the immediate need for the body and more oriented towards understanding and contemplation. By contrast, touch occupies the lowest place in the hierarchy. It is the most material of the senses, closely bound to the bodily survival. Sensing heat, cold, pain, pressure, and primarily concerning with physical well-being of the organism. It does not naturally elevate the mind to universal truth, nor does it directly serve rational activity. Taste and smell, although not as low as touch, also belong to the realm of bodily appetite, belong more to the realm of bodily appetite than intellectual formation. Like taste, it's in Holy Scripture it says, taste that the Lord is good. And when we receive the Holy Eucharist, we do taste that the Lord is good, right? When we smell incense, it elevates our prayers towards God. Oh, I forgot a few slides. I will skip this one because of time. The image depicts Saint José Sanchez del Rio, a 14-year-old Mexican martyr who died during the Cristero War. Looking into his eyes reveals his purity, his innocence, and also his determination. I don't know what you think, at least it's what I saw in his eyes. Purity, innocence, and determination. The Bible teaches us that the light of the body is the eye. If the eye be single, thy whole body shall be lightsome. But if thy eye be evil, the whole body shall be darksome. Matthew 6:22. Jesus teaches that the eye is the lamp of the body, meaning it reveals what is within and shapes how we see and live. A pure eye reflects a pure heart. A corrupt eye reveals inner darkness. St. Augustine wrote that the soul uses the eye as its window. What is within the heart is first often seen in the eye. Further, the intellect depends on the senses less than any power of the sensitive. Further, the intellect depends on the senses less than any power of the sensitive part. But the intellect knows nothing except what it receives from the senses. Whence it is said that he that lacks one sense lacks one kind of knowledge. This is a quote by St. Thomas. This raises an important question. How can we gain full and living knowledge of God if we are deprived of two of the most important senses, sight and hearing, which are the chief instruments through which the divine truth reaches us? Therefore, it is interesting to listen to the story of Helen Keller. She was born on June 27, 1880 in the United States. At 19 months old, she contracted an illness, possibly scarf fever or meningitis, which left her both deaf and blind, without the ability to hear or see. Helen's early years were filled with frustration and isolation. She could only communicate through basic signs and emotional expressions, and her family felt helpless. Until a teacher arrived who would change everything. In 1887, when Helen was nearly 7 years old, Anne Sullivan came into her life. And with immense patience and genius, Anne used tactile sign language, spelling words into Helen's palm, to teach her that everything has a name. And the breakthrough came with the word water, when Anne pumped cool water over Helen's hand and signed W-A-T-E-R into her palm. Later, Helen would write, "That living water awakened my soul, gave it light, hope, joy, set it free." End of quote. This awakening opened the path not only to knowledge, but eventually even to faith. The idea of God, the soul and divine love was explained to her. And to everyone's surprise, Helen responded, quote, "I knew God before you told me, only I didn't know his name." End of quote. This remarkable moment suggests that God already had spoken to her interiorly, perhaps through what St. Thomas would call the natural light of reason. Helen Keller was baptized, affirming her faith in Christ, and she said, I quote, "I believe that God is in me as the sun is in the color and fragrance of a flower, the light in my darkness, the voice in my silence." End of quote. Very beautiful how she put. God does not abandon those who are blind or deaf, but it is nonetheless easy to see how much more difficult it is to make someone who does not have both of those senses to learn things. It was very difficult to have Helen Keller learn these things, until the path was found. The exception proves the rule, that sight and hearing are the most noble because they give us more universal knowledge of things. After the fall of Adam and Eve, our senses no longer operate in perfect harmony with reason and will. But this is Helen Keller. Different stages of her life. After the fall of Adam and Eve, our senses no longer operate in a perfect harmony with reason and will. Instead, they began to stir within us disordered desires and the natural inclination towards sin. This wounded condition of the human nature is something every one of us experience every day. But what exactly is concupiscence? The Church teaches that concupiscence refers to the disordered desire or inclination towards sin that remains in us even after baptism, as a result of the lasting wounds caused by the original sin itself. The Catechism of the Catholic Church explains this clearly. Concupiscence is not sin in itself, but it inclines us towards sin. It makes the moral life a genuine spiritual struggle. The expression of St. Augustine is, concupiscence is fomus peccati, meaning a hunger for sin. In other words, baptism removes the guilt of the original sin, but it does not remove the effects, especially the interior weakness and disorder. Man revolts against God. His own nature, so to speak, revolts against him. And the internal hierarchy of intelligence, will and sensibility is corrupted. Our senses may pull us towards illicit pleasure, pride and selfishness, even when our reason and our will know what is right. This tension is part of our human condition after the fall. and understanding it is essential if we want to grow in virtue and overcome the temptations that press upon us from within. In John 2:16 we read, "For all that is in the world is the concupiscence of the flesh, and the concupiscence of the eye, and the pride of life, which is not of the Father, but of the world." I put a few examples of concupiscence, this tendency to sin, right? By stealing, by overeating, by using aggression without self-control. I mean, you can put many other examples. Concupiscence of the flesh is the disordered desire for sexual pleasures, especially those contrary to temperance, gluttony, lust, and sloth. This does not mean that the body is evil. It is good, made by God. But because of original sin, our desires are no longer easily ruled by reason. The flesh rebels against the spirit. And this inner war causes us to seek comfort and pleasure against the will of God. Concupiscence of the eye refers to the disordered desire to possess or covet material things seen, greed, envy, inordinate curiosity. The eyes represent our longing for visible external things, wealth, beauty, possessions, or even knowledge acquired out of pride. Eve's temptation in Genesis 3:6, she says, "The fruit was pleasant to the eye," a symbol of how sin often begins with a visual attraction, leading to a disordered desire. And the pride of life, the last one, the desire to be self-sufficient, to seek power, fame, status, control, placing oneself above God. In the book of Genesis, the temptation is described as being like God. This is the most dangerous of the three. It is the root of all sin, pride, the sin of Lucifer and Adam. It leads man to trust himself rather than in God, seeking independence from the law of God. And then the three harmonies that we lost because of sin. We lost the harmony between God and the soul. Because before sin, man was in a state of original justice. His soul was united with God through grace. Whereas after sin, original sin broke this harmony. But through Christ, grace is restored in baptism. Grace was re-established the harmony with God. And then second, the harmony between soul and body. Before the sin, the soul ruled over the body peacefully, and the desires were subject to reason. The body and its passion, after the sin, the body and its passion often rebelled against the soul's higher reason. This is the struggle of every Christian, as we read in Romans 7. And by mortification, discipline, prayer, fasting, and grace, we begin to regain self-mastery. And this is why the Church insists on penance. It's part of restoring the soul's rightful governance over the body. And last, the harmony between body and the goods of the world. Before sin, man used the world rightly. Material things served man's holiness. Whereas after sin, we are tempted to misuse creation, either by idealizing things, greed, abusing them, waste, or addiction, and by living in temperance, using the world without being attached, and recognizing that created goods are means to help us glorify God and love others, and not to enslave us. That is the purpose. So what happens when we give free way to touch? Basically, you get all the things of the 60s. Right? Free love, drugs, orgies, all kinds of sin. Tattoos, drugs, you can name many things. And these are all presented as forms of liberation. As if breaking every boundary would somehow lead to a higher form of humanity. But in reality, such excesses only deepen the spiritual emptiness and the moral confusion of those who pursue them. Inevitably, this rejection of moral order drives some people towards even more extreme expressions of disorder, And one striking example is body suspension. I even didn't know it existed, luckily for a long time. But this is real. One striking example is, as I mentioned, this body suspension, a form of body modification in which individuals hang from hooks temporarily inserted to the skin. Although it has its root in ancient rituals, its modern rival is often linked to search for intense sensation, altered states of consciousness, and a misguided attempt to transcend to God. This is their purpose. But body suspension is only one illustration of a broader truth. Once the society rejects objective morality and God-given dignity of the person, it does not remain neutral. It gravitates toward practices that degrade the body and distort the soul. You see also in all the things they do to the body nowadays, with piercings everywhere, large holes in the ear, all over the body. Well, you know the examples, I guess. This progression shows us something important. Without God, the human heart seeks illicit extremes to fill the void. And those extremes become increasingly destructive. True freedom, true healing, true elevation of the human person can never be found in such practices. Only in returning to order, purity and grace of God that intended from the beginning. And those who fully surrender themselves to sin undergo a profound transition, not just morally and spiritually, but often even physically. The more a person becomes enslaved by disordered passions, the more their character and even their appearance can reflect this inner corruption. Sin distorts the soul, and in time the body begins to manifest the consequences of this repeated moral disorder. And this is why we sometimes observe how extreme lifestyles or compulsive indulgence in vices can leave visible marks on a person's countenance, a hardness, a tension, a kind of emptiness that speaks of the interior life. In some cases, public figures who have lived undergo intense pressures and persuade destructive habits that can appear altered, altering their faces, reflecting the toll of years' struggle, inner conflict and self-destructive choices. The point here is not to single out anyone, but to illustrate the profound spiritual principle. Habitual sin shapes the person as a whole, the soul, mind and body. This leaves visible traces of its dominion. We are a unity of body and soul, right? So our body is a reflection of what is inside. Is it clear? I heard several of you speaking of Satanists or coming across people that dedicate themselves to Satan. And you see immediately, right? In the eyes or the whole way of being, you can even feel that they're different. Like you see a saint, immediately you recognize this man must be a saint or close to being a saint. One other example would be the Beatles. If you look at the Beatles, the first photos of when they started, they look really innocent, kind of childish and very lively and fun and making jokes. It looks very innocent at the beginning. But then if you look at the Beatles at the end of their life, it's quite different. The opposite of this enslavement to sin is the man who is chaste. And chastity is part of the virtue of temperance and therefore of self-control. Chastity helps reason to moderate the desires to moderate the desire and use of things that give the most sensual pleasure. And the greatest source are the two basically, food and drinks, which sustain the person's life, and the sexual intercourse, which ensures the survival of the human species. And most people recognize that how the abuse of food and drink are harmful, a consequence of the individual and of his environment. People speak about it all the time, right? You need to do diet, you need to lose weight, you shouldn't eat too much fat, you should cut on sugar, So all the time people are saying, oh, be careful with food, don't overeat, don't get overweighted, etc. They're always warning for that, right? But when are they warning for the misuse of the sexual desires that a man has? Which are not in itself illicit within marriage, they have their illicit place. But outside of that, and even within marriage, can be illicit if performed against the will of God. Like doing contraception. And then intercourse within marriage would be illicit because of the use of contraceptives. Chastity is often despised today, at best regarded as outdated, irrelevant. But is that really the case? Throughout history, Christian civilization has consistently celebrated chastity as a supreme virtue, even calling it the virtue of the angels. In other words, chastity elevates the human person in such a way that in a sense share in the dignity of angels. It's also something Protestantism doesn't do, right? Luther was extreme in his way how he dealt with women. He married several times, and he even admitted that he could not control himself, and that's why he married. So, and in Münster, where the Protestants were, there was also free love, even in terms of sexuality. And to understand this, let us consider the relationship between chastity and the angels. I think you know the hierarchy, right? You have the minerals, you have the plants. The plants live at least, right? They don't have instinct, but they live. The minerals do not. And then you have plants, then you have animals who also live, but have instinct. Then you have the human being that has a soul, that is eternal, and that also has intelligence, but also has these lower faculties. And then you have angels, the different hierarchies of angels, and then you have God, right? So, and you can see basically that when a person gives himself totally to evil, he becomes more animal-like. He cannot control himself. He becomes, in terms of sexuality, more like a dog who has no self-control. He sees a female dog and he does whatever he does, right? There's no self-control. But those who are saints, they elevate. They don't become really angels. They still are humans, but almost like angels. And many saints are described as angels for this reason. And we have seen this very clear we did a campaign in Warsaw against LGBT. Maybe, I'm pretty sure many of you have seen the video. It's a video where we are like 10 men with red capes, and we are protesting LGBT, and then there's a group of women, quote-unquote women, that start barking at us like dogs. This really happened. The video went viral, over 25 million views worldwide. This is what I could count, and I have proof of, but many more have seen it. I mean, my children were complaining to me and said, well, I've seen this video already 3 times, I don't want to see it anymore. Because everyone was sharing it everywhere, in Instagram and TikTok, etc. So, but it's typical that these protesters against us were barking like dogs. This is their argument that they have. They have no real reasonable argument. The only argument they have is of animals that bark. And it showed the ridicule of their movement, basically. To understand this, did I finish this? Yeah. A chaste person, however, is not only someone who refrains from illicit sexual activity. Chastity is much broader. It is the discipline of placing the spirit above matter in all aspects of life. So placing the spirit above all matters in matter in all aspects. When instincts or passions conflict with reason and moral law, the chaste person exercises self-mastery, choosing what is right over what is merely pleasurable at the moment. In this way, chastity cultivates not only purity of body, but clarity of mind, strength of will, and the soul oriented towards God. Truly a virtue that lifts humanity towards the order of the angels. Is it clear so far? So, I now will present you a fortification that you can use. It has 5 points. And these 5 points are the fortified wall and the defense, the castle that defends your chastity. So if you want to become chaste, hopefully you are, but if you're not totally pure like the saints are, and many of us have to confess that we're not saints yet, then this gives you some tools, so to say, of how to become chaste. Because it's not just enough to simply take a restriction on the internet, to say, okay, I've restricted internet, now I am chaste. It's not as simple as that, right? Even though it can help, maybe, but there's more to it than that. And it's more than just a list of what is forbidden. Thou shalt not this, this, and this. It's not, then you do not become automatically chaste. It's much more than that. So the first one, humility. The first tower, so to say, that defends chastity. Saint Augustine said, if you should ask me, what are the ways of God? I would tell you that the first one is humility. The second one is humility. And the third one is humility. End of quote. Without humility, a person becomes overly confident in his own spiritual strength and will easily fall into temptation, especially the sins of the flesh. The Desert Fathers taught, quote, flee occasion of sin and never trust yourself until death. Never trust yourself. It's basically the same also in Protestantism. They say the endurance of the endurance, how is it called, of the Christians basically. You cannot fall off the faith. It's impossible according to them. So once a Christian, you're always a Christian. You can never fall. As Catholics, we know you can always fall. You can even curse God on your deathbed and still go to hell and live Christian life all of your life. So you have to be careful unto death. Only then you are sure, and before not. We can trust that we are, so to say, sarcastically saying, we can trust that we are strong enough. We could say, oh, well, I'm strong enough. I will resist sin. And that, oh, well, my children will never do such a thing. Well, it is a trap. We should see readily and head on and recognize that we are weak. We are easily falling into sin. For parents who want to offer their children a filtered internet, and for adults who know their own weakness, a Custodio app is a good option. With this app, you can block certain bad websites and block the use of YouTube. So it's an app on your phone, and it's connected to someone else who has the same app, and he can see everything that you see on your phone and computer. So just the fact that someone else knows helps already, right? We should know that God knows. He watches what you watch on internet. That this should be sufficient, but weak as we are, it may help that your friend, someone you trust, also can see what you see on internet. And if you have anything difficult to explain, it helps to say, okay, I think I shouldn't be opening this website, or should be skipping this. This is not good. You can also put controls and say, okay, after 11 o'clock at the evening or 10 o'clock, the internet is blocked, or YouTube is blocked, or certain keywords cannot be typed in Google, etc. So the app provides all of these possibilities. The second, mortification of soul and body. The mortification of the soul refers to the spiritual discipline of denying oneself internally, especially in thoughts, desires, and affections, and will, in order to grow in holiness and union with God. It is distinct from mortification of the body, such as fasting and physical penance. This is a key part of the traditional Catholic spiritual life and is taught by the saints, particularly those in the Carmelite and Dominican orders. The pedagogical advantage is clear. If you learn to renounce some legitimate pleasures, you will be stronger to renounce the illegitimate ones. Examples of mortification of soul, and it's interesting to look at mortification of the soul, because usually with mortification you think about fasting, right? Or things like that, which is good. It's something very important to do. Or other ways of doing penance. I recently, a friend of mine said, well, I had a guest, he stayed in my house, and then I was taking his sheets when he left. And then I found that he took a shelf from the bookcase and put it inside his bed. He said, well, it was a penance. I know several saints, they would sleep on a stone floor, and so this is mortification of the body. But how about mortification of the soul? It is to avoid sinful or useless thoughts, to root out fantasies, prideful thoughts, judgments of others, self-pity. How prominent, how widespread is self-pity? I mean, we have to be really careful not to have self-pity. And to practice recollection, to keep your eyes and your mind frequently on God, the saints and the mystery of the Rosary, Scripture, to say no to your preferences, to choose what you do not like, and to accept an inconvenient task joyfully, happily, to eat what is set before you, and not to complain, I don't like this, and why are we eating this again, and the cook was not very good. No, to say, okay, fantastic, I really like, I enjoy it, thank you for cooking for me. That's mortification of the soul. And to submit your will to the authorities, your confessor, your superior, or other legitimate authorities. Mortify the urge to speak. Well, many are suffering from that, right? They spoke before they should have, or they spoke more than they should have. I'm speaking of myself also included, of course. I'm not just speaking of you, to be clear. To complain, to criticize, to gossip. I mean, to complain, I have to confess also a lot. How often are we complaining? It's uncomfortable, it was not pleasant, I didn't sleep well, and I'm really tired, why do I have to do this? And to choose silence instead of unnecessarily talking. Accept humiliations quietly, without aggression, without defending yourself. Well, I could go on and on, there are more. So the third tower, diligence and application. Diligence is the virtue that opposes sloth, which is not just laziness, but a sadness or a boredom about spiritual good. Diligence fills the soul with purpose, leaving no room for idleness, which is a workshop of the devil, and order the will towards good and the service of God. A diligent student or worker is far less likely to fall into temptation of impurity, because their energy is rightly ordered and occupied. An application refers to the focused and deliberate effort to a given task. Whether praying, study, working, or service, it's part of diligence, but emphasizing the interior engagement. Directs the mind and the imagination away from vain and impure thoughts. Strengthen the will, giving it either control over impulses, control over impulses. To quote Saint John Bosco, be always busy to do something. When the devil will find you, then the devil will always find you occupied. So, be always busy with something, then the devil will find you occupied and cannot tempt you. The fourth one, love of God and devotion to Our Lady. According to St. Thomas, chastity is a fruit of the theological virtue of charity, the love of God. And he teaches chastity properly arises from the love of God, which prefers the divine good to bodily pleasures. So as your love for God increases, your desire to offend him by impurity decreases. Chastity becomes not just a burden, but a joy, a way to love God and your body, with your body. To quote Romans 12, "Blessed are those clean of heart, for they shall see God." It's from Matthew 5. The most blessed Virgin Mary is the model and guardian of chastity, and she is called the Virgin most pure, and the perfect example of chaste love, loving God completely soul and body. I quote, "Never it was known that anyone who fled to thy protection was left unaided," end of quote, says the Memorare prayer. And Alphonse Ligori teaches that devotion to Mary is morally necessary. and necessary for salvation. So the last one, the fortified wall. So the fortified wall, the opportunity to sin accounts for 80% of the problem. For example, someone who out of curiosity and out of their free will goes out to hang out in Amsterdam red light district is clearly putting themselves in a position to sin. Someone who, without urgent need, subscribes to magazines and channels that always contain immoral content is asking to fall. A young man who goes to suspicious parties, he cannot complain about the consequences. The sexual instinct is one of the most volcanic, that is prone to very strong eruptions, especially in young people. Therefore, a lack of vigilance in this area can open all the doors and abysses of all kinds. So, I come to my conclusion, and I think, or I hope, this is the part you will like most. You can endure me speaking so much and so fast, etc., in poor English. But this part will be of what will be the fruit of becoming chaste or being chaste. So obviously it's first to attain heaven, clearly. But it will also transform you now in this life. So that's what we're going to speak about now. As mentioned, chastity is despised nowadays. We have seen what kind of man sin produces. But what kind of man does chastity produce? Is it someone weak, effeminate, someone sad and depressed? That's basically what Freud was saying, Sigmund Freud. Maybe you know him, right? For psychoanalysis. He would say if you suppress your sexual desires, they will burst out in extreme forms, etc. So he would basically say that to control yourself by living chaste and not having any form of sexual contact, like priests or brothers, religious brothers, he would say it basically corrupts you. And they would the world nowadays likes to portray priests as being kind of silly and a bit laughable men, not really men. But first of all, a chaste man is full of energy. Chastity orders our passions rightly. Instead of being drained by disordered desires, lust or emotional confusion, a chaste person is interiorly free and he can focus their strength on love and virtue. The soul is not enslaved by the body, but directed towards good, realizing great spiritual and physical energy. Unchaste desires cloud the intellect because they pull down the mind towards the temporal and the selfish. Chastity brings clarity of mind and helps us perceive truth more purely. Quote, "For wisdom will not enter into a malicious soul, nor dwell in a body subject to sin." Is it still hearable? You can hear me still? A chaste person sees others and the world as God does, and not through the lens of lust, but of dignity and truth. This leads to right judgment and better decisions. Chastity does not kill pleasure, it purifies pleasure. The chaste person can truly enjoy friendship, beauty, music and food. I mean, maybe to give an example, if you really master your desires, you can really enjoy a good glass of wine and contemplate on the taste and the different flavors and the different types of wine and all the shades and how it matches maybe a certain food. This is when you master and control. You can enjoy wine or whiskeys that I like in a way elevated. But if you're an alcoholic, you're not even liking it, right? You're just shoving vodka or low-level beer, just getting drunk, right? You're not really enjoying it. So chastity is not about killing the pleasures, but lifting the pleasures to contemplate God. I mean, our founder wrote a contemplation about God based on a glass of beer on a hot summer. So a hot summer can make you think of God. It should make you think of God. Like we should glorify God in everything. So we have to glorify God also in drinking a glass of beer. So drink in a godly way. That's the motto. It's now not so hot, but in a few days when it's really hot, please do that. Chastity removes the using of others and allows for authentic love rooted in the good of the other and not in selfishness. It is a foundation of true friendship. Love one another as I have loved you. Chastity also unites one's desires to God's will. This gives deep purpose, even when life is difficult, because suffering becomes a path of love and grace. Quote from Corinthians, I chastise my body and bring it to subjection. So this is the last part. Over 10 centuries ago, and this is the last fruit that chastity will bring you. It will make you into real men, like Saint Godfrey of Bouillon. 10 centuries ago, a Muslim emir wanted to see Godfrey of Bouillon because he was impressed with his fame and strength. He has heard so many wonderful anecdotes about Godfrey, and his renown was so fabulous that he had long harbored the desire to see him. The special quality that touched him the most, and that was specifically what he wanted to ascertain in the French hero, was his muscular strength, of which it was said he was gifted to an incredible degree. So like one example of this crusader, he once in a battle, he cut a Turk in half. So the Turk was cut like this. So half of his body fell off his horse, the other half stayed on the horse, hooked with the foot, and then the horse ran into the city. It put, of course, tremendous terror in the Muslims, seeing that. They were full of fear for these crusaders that would conquer them. And that was Godfrey doing it. The emir wanted to test him, and he showed him a camel, which he had brought along for this purpose, begging Godfrey to behead him with a sword, saying the animal party would not allow this to do, but they didn't mind back then. Godfrey, he asked him to behead him with a sword, saying that it would give him great honor. The king consented, King Godfrey, consented to the strange request. Drawing his sword, he struck the camel's neck, cutting it neatly like a goose. For a moment the emir stood amazed, and then with the humble and sly smile of so common for his kind, he said, "It remains to be seen if the king could do the same with another sword." So Godfrey immediately took the emir's scimitar, how you say? And sliced off the head of a second camel, just as easily. When asked where his strength came from, he answered, the answer of Godfrey, "These hands never committed impurity." So he said, this is where my strength is from my purity. Godfrey was courageous not because he could face, Godfrey was courageous not only because he could face external enemies, but because he has already won the internal battle. His chastity allowed him to confront evil without fear and to lead others by example, inspiring them to courage and holiness. So if you have a difficult task, something that requires a lot of courage, and you are thinking, who should I ask? Find the person that is most pure. He will get it done, and he will not fear the enemy. This story shows us that true strength is not merely physical, but moral and spiritual. Godfrey's extraordinary courage and power flow from his self-mastery and virtue, and not from pride and force alone. By conquering his own passions, he became a leader capable of inspiring others and confronting any challenge with confidence. To summarize, in this presentation we have looked at the decline of moral and spiritual awareness in our time. We have seen how the warning of Fatima and strengthened the insight by Professor Plinio Correa de Oliveira to help us understand the root of this crisis. And of course, most of all, we must examine our own consciences. And that was very much my intention, not to point fingers at anyone, but to draw strength from the example of a man who conquered his own heart by facing the world. And perhaps Godfrey, if he were among us today, he might simply remind us, if you want to change the world, start by keeping your internal sword, that is your chastity, sharp. With that, we have come to the end of my presentation. I thank you for your attention.